Congratulations on having Project Mercury shortlisted, Gillian.
Thank you very much.
I loved it, and I've just done, as I sent you the email, I just have a little synopsis of how I took it as a reader, and I thought it was hugely enjoyable and darkly humorous. I really liked it. Your narrator is part of a SWAT team undertaking a raid in the suburbs of Adelaide. On his way to arrest the murderer, he spots a VW he didn't get to have. He wishes he had the same sort of gate buzzer as at the one at the criminal's house. There are images of blood, bowls of lemons catching the sun, the high tension of a raid alongside memories of a swing in his childhood home. So you could say, Gillian, your narrator is a man whose mind is not on the job.
Yes.
So you were inspired to write this story after reading about the South Australian police raids last year in suburban Adelaide as part of what was called Operation Ironside.
Yes.
Something that you found morbidly fascinating were your words, Gillian. Could you tell us more about that?
Yeah, so it was this huge effort by the Australian Federal Police. They kind of infiltrated the communication system that all of these kind of like criminal networks were using to plan really quite horrible crimes, including an attempted murder. So at the time after the raids, the local newspaper actually published this full list of first names, last names, ages of everybody who was arrested, what they were arrested for, and most interestingly to me, the suburbs that they lived in. And I found myself kind of like pouring through this list, looking for somebody who I knew or like my suburb, and was kind of like, why am I so like morbidly fascinated by this idea that sort of like, you know, you can have criminals living in ordinary suburbs next to ordinary people and just not even know about it. So yeah, it was definitely something that I was like, well, I should probably write about this.
So that kick-started you, and you called this genre suburban Gothic, Gillian.
Yes.
Could you define suburban Gothic and how it influenced the way you approach this story?
Yeah, so I think that the best way that I've heard the suburban Gothic defined is as a Gothic of the everyday. So it sort of, it plays on suburban tropes and it kind of probes the suburban experience, looking for those kinds of cracks in the veneer, I guess you would say, kind of, you know, going underneath the mask of what's ordinary and what's mundane and looking like trying to find those kind of fears and anxieties. And this whole idea with Operation Ironside, this monster next door, I think is a very suburban Gothic idea. And I work with specifically Australian suburban Gothic as well. So when I find sort of those real life examples of the Gothic playing itself out, I feel like I have to latch onto that and do something with it.
So instead of a medieval castle on a hill surrounded by a moat, it's a house in middle class.
Exactly.
Yeah. I really liked the humour in this story, and the humour really fits suburban Gothic as you explained it. For example, your narrator notices that the undies on the clothesline are the same as the Bond undies he's wearing under layers and layers of protective equipment and uniform, itself a metaphor. And is at the point of pointing this out to his team member when she says 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 and smashes in the back door. Can you tell us how you make the humour work so well in this suburban Gothic story?
It's funny because I never really think of my writing as being humorous, but many people point it out to me all the time. And so I think I had to think really hard about this one because yeah, I didn't recognize it myself at first, but I think it's that idea that you're taking something that's very extremely familiar to the reader, this typical Aussie bloke, and you're kind of creating this, like, we're complicit, me as the writer and the reader, in perpetuating these stereotypes and just kind of falling into them, like, show me an Aussie bloke who doesn't wear Bonds undies, you know? So yeah, I suppose it's that kind of absurd stereotype that kind of facilitates the humor really well.
And putting those domestic details alongside a raid of a murderer, and him noticing, the SWAT team member noticing bonds on the van. Towards the end of your story, your narrator watches his team give chase to the criminal, and he stands, and this is a quote, he stands in the middle of the street, 1 foot on either side of the white line, dividing the road into 2 neat halves. Can you tell us what this says about your character, Gillian?
Yeah, so I think it speaks to sort of, as the suburban subject, it speaks to that idea about the Australian suburban dream and the ultimate like unattainability of it. And I think at this point, our narrator is sort of, he's at that weird crossroads where he's got all of these things that he wants out of his life, or he thinks that he should want out of his life. He's got, you know, a wife, they've got a baby on the way, he wants to buy a house, he wants to buy a nice VW ute, and then he's kind of fallen into this situation where he's become infected by this weird supernatural thing, and he has this newfound power. And so it's that idea that he's kind of caught between like being that regular suburban guy and then following this kind of sinister power that he's been presented with.
It works really well, that image of him standing either side of that dividing line on the road. I really liked that. It was really effective. So when you're writing, do you imagine the readers and what they might be feeling, or are you focused on your character as the reader?
Yeah, I think it's fair to say that I'm focused on the character as the reader. I think that I assume that my readers are like me and live in the suburbs and live kind of ordinary lives. And so I think that in trying to inhabit the psyche of a particular suburban subject, the readers are really going to identify with that and like see themselves in there. So yeah, it's sort of the character and the reader are kind of the same person in a sense.
Yes, it's interesting to see where a writer pinpoints that focus. Some are focusing on the reader, some are focusing on the character as the reader. So as part of the interview, Gillian, we're asking you to read 100 words from or about a minute, not exactly 100, about a minute of your story. Have you selected a little section you'd like to read out now?
I do. I have a very small section that kind of happens right before they're getting ready to bust into the house. So it starts at 04:55 hours. It's Glenn, Cameron and Mohammed at the front, Lauren and him round the back, clasps his hands to boost her over the gate and then clambers over after her. Tight corridor, squeeze past the wheelie bins, get a whiff of old food. Lauren clicks on a torch but keeps the beam low. Light sparks on something in the flower bed, both of them stop dead, hands flit to guns on belts. Figure out it's the flashing eyes of a cat, dark as shadows at the same time, and give shaky smiles at each other. Would bet her heart's punching about as hard as his right now. Shadow cat comes to slink around their feet. Shoo, Shadow cat. Gentle boot and Shadow cat scrams, but with a look like letting them know it was him decided to go and the boot had nothing to do with it. Quiet step from grass to patio, around the outdoor dining set, can't help admiring the TV setup, reach the back door, torch off, quick glance at the watch and they settle themselves into position. Breathe in.
Oh, that's fantastic. And the tension of that staccato rhythm too, where you were going for that, were you? That really staccato
yeah,
rhythm.
definitely. It's kind of that internal monologue going on,
Yeah, it works really well. Thank you so much, Gillian, and congratulations again on being on the shortlist for the
Thank you.
Writers Competition. And enjoy the rest of your summer's day.
Thank you. You as well.
Okay, thanks, Gillian. Bye.